Hi everybody, this is Agnes from No Sediment, and today we are going to do Burgundy things in Barolo. We are going to taste and compare 5 Barolos from 5 different villages. It is so common to taste Pinot Noir from various villages, various Premier Cru and Grand Cru sites from different climats and compare the slightest differences between them. That is the Burgundy way. And Pinot Noir is perfect for that because it can show even the smallest differences between its terroir. And guys, terroir is not just the soil. It is elevation, aspect, wind, every single environmental factor that affects the vine. And yes, it is also winemaking and the winemaker's hands and thoughts as well. You know, my favorite grape variety is Nebbiolo, and it happens to be just as magical as Pinot Noir. And it also happens to respond just as sensitively to where it is grown as Pinot Noir does. There are 11 communes that can make Barolo wine. The most famous is of course Barolo itself. After all, the entire DOCG is named after it. There are different schools of thought. Those who believe that the greatest Barolo is made by blending fruit from various villages and sites together, and those who believe that single site or single vineyard wines is where the true grandiosity of Barolo shines. Today we are going to please the latter ones and explore differences between 5 Barolo communes. We will follow that with a tasting of wines from these 5 villages and experience those differences in blind. Please do not expect deep dive into soils from me. I think soils are extremely important when talking about wine, but it is the structure, water retention and drainage, health, biodiversity and pH of soils that matter more than simply knowing when they formed. And if I tell you that the soils formed in Tertonian period, it tells you nothing about their structure and their health. It is important to know that even though producers might be located in a specific commune, it does not mean they own vineyards only within the borders of their village. Many will have vineyards outside or buy grapes from other areas. So for a real village distinction, I would suggest looking for wines that actually state a single commune on the label. One could argue that we could simply compare different plots or MGAs, but in my opinion, they offer more of their own unique character rather than a stylistic generality of its commune. We are going to taste wines from 2 western villages, La Morra and Verduno. La Morra is the largest commune in terms of vineyard area. It is also responsible for some of the highest vineyards in Barolo, ranging from 230 to 500 meters above sea level. Of course, we have to mention soils here, which are extremely complex, dominated by younger Tertonian formations rich in clay and silt. La Morra vineyards are mostly defined by eastern exposure. All of these factors, of course, have huge impact on wine, which is why La Morra is often associated with stylistically producing wines of lighter and more perfumed character. They are often more approachable in their youth, offering softer and lighter tannins and lighter body. That said, these wines still offer magnificent aging potential, just as the best Barolos do. Verduno is one of the smallest communes we will taste today. It is also not one of the original 5, but it has become increasingly important, especially if we start name dropping. The famous Monvigliero vineyard is located here. Verduno is northeastern extension of La Morra and is often grouped with La Morra when it comes to style. It enjoys cooling alpine influence and offers wines with finesse and elegance similar to those of La Morra. Next, we have villages of Serralunga di Alba and Monforte di Alba, both with older Serravallian soils dominating their vineyards with high content of calcium carbonate that often yields more concentrated and richer wines. Serralunga di Alba, this is where I started my Barolo journey and where I fell in love with the wines. It is the most eastern village of Barolo, and like Barolo itself, is entirely within the DOCG zone. We have the oldest soils here, Serravallian soils that are extremely rich in clay, limestone, and silt. What I think is extremely important is that Serralunga has its vineyards exposed both to eastern and western side. Southwest-facing vineyards get exposure to that really intense sun, while the morning sun is gentler to the wines. Wines from Serralunga are always linked with power, structure, and tremendous aging capacity, but I don't believe they lack finesse and elegance either. Many argue that Serralunga is more Barolo than Barolo itself. And it might be true. When you read general books of what Barolo is, they often match exactly what we associate with Serralunga: power, intensity, full body, and the texture of tannin. It might be the case that Monforte di Alba is the most difficult village to generalize about. Talking soils, this area features the older Lecchio formation shared with Serralunga, but also sandstone and fossil marls shared with La Morra. Similarly to Serralunga, wines here are planted on opposite sides on eastern and western exposures, with the eastern side experiencing that cooling effect coming from the Alta Langa. Similarly, like La Morra, this village also offers some of the highest vineyards of Barolo, with elevation between 200 to 500 meters above sea level. With all these differences, of course, it becomes very difficult to generalize about the wine style of Monforte. Still, more often than not, it is grouped with Serralunga, responsible for concentrated, dense, and highly structured Barolos made for long cellaring. Barolo is the village this famous wine got its name from. It is one of the 3 communes whose entire area falls within the Barolo DOCG. You will find both younger Tortonian and older Serravallian soils here. As a result, wines from this area are often described as having best of both worlds, showing perfume and elegance as well as rich body and tannic structure. I myself find wines from this area really hard to define, and I think it really comes down to each producer. And some of the greatest names from here, think of Bartolo Mascarello, stand by the idea that Great Barolo has always been a blend from various sites and villages. So maybe it is Barolo village that represents the essence of Barolo itself and best of Barolo villages. Now, let's move under the roof and taste wines we just discussed. All right, now that we are inside in the warmth, we can actually taste these wines from 5 different communes and see, do the theory that we discussed before actually really holds up in the glass. So we will start with wine number 1. So all of these wines are from 5 different producers, from 5 different communes that we discussed before, and they all are from 2021 vintage, one of the greatest vintages for Barolo and Barbaresco wines, by the way. So if you want to stack up your cellar with Barolo wines, this is exactly the vintage you want to have. By the way, these wines were poured by my cameraman, so I don't know which one is which. So, as I said, let's start with wine number 1. Okay, so of course we do have that fragrant aromatics of Nebbiolo grape variety, and it is pale in color. We do not expect very intensely, deeply colored wines from Nebbiolo grape. Even if it is a relatively young vintage as 2021, it will already have some of that orangey or brick hint to the color. So that is very typical of the grape variety itself. And like fresh raspberries, strawberries, sour cherries on the nose. You do have some floral element as well here. So this is quite fragrant wine with this really intense nose of red berries and maybe some roses or rose stems even. And of course, we do have that very typical earthiness, that hint of earthiness from Nebbiolo. It is not very expressive in this wine though. You maybe just pick up some hint of it. So it is mostly dominated by these fresh berries and that floral element. Let's taste it. It is an early morning, and tasting Barolo in the morning can be quite a shock to your taste buds. So I have to embrace myself. All right, it wasn't that bad. And by bad, I mean the shock. The shock wasn't that intense here. I would say that this one is more towards the elegant style. You know, we do have really expressive, drawing, high levels of tannins, but those tannins are managed beautifully. There is elegance to the tannins. They are maybe not as big and not as punchy. They're more towards silky. If at all we can call Nebbiolo tannins silky, then this actually it is. There's beautiful elevated acidity. I don't think that this wine is too rich and too big, bold. Sometimes when you read books about Barolo wine, they usually say this is big, bold, full-bodied wine, age-worthy, structured wine. Of course, there are examples like that, but this wine number one, in my opinion, in my personal view, is more towards the elegant, style. And we do have that structure from the tannins. We do have that elevated, lively, almost brisk acidity, but there is that fruit, there is that calmness, there is that not in your face presence. I think it is lovely. I will give this wine 93 points. So let's move to wine number 2. All right. This has more intensity. If wine number 1 was more fragrant, like you have to catch it a little bit, this one shows that really ripe, crunchy though, red cherry flavor right in your face. But it is not like in any way bold or, rich or like Cabernet Sauvignon cake. It is still very tied back. And with some time in the glass, it also starts to show some of those truffly notes, especially white truffle. Of course, it is not the same as you just lift the dome of the truffle and it just fills the room, but you feel it somewhere in the background, that slightly mushroomy, that porcini, that white truffle, that forest, damp earth element in it. And this is something that I love Nebbiolo so much for. And if we had like strawberries, raspberries, and mix of red berries in the wine number 1, this one is really dominated by that bright cherry character. Let's taste it. All right, so wine number 2, there is way more presence, structure, body on the palate. It also seems somehow warmer when it comes to alcohol. So for wine number 1, I didn't pick the alcohol at all, even though it was my first wine of the day. So for wine number 2, following and still showing some of that warmth, it made me question if the alcohol is really that well integrated within wine itself. But of course, we can only understand that, when we retaste it. I think that wine number 2 really shows the typical Nebbiolo tannin. It is elevated, it is a bit coarse. It kind of have that sandpapery texture on the palate. And I do feel it still. It is also much fuller bodied. You feel more presence. The mid palate is way more richer and rounder, more intense here. The acidity is nicely integrated. You feel that it's really high and it's lively. But it is part of the fruit, something that I do enjoy myself a lot. I will give this wine 92 points. So let's move to wine number 3. So somehow wine number 3 to me shows more resolved fruit or crushed fruit or, fruit that has been picked and just stayed on the table, in the bowl for a while. You do have these strawberries, but they're second day strawberries. You do have raspberries, but they are second day raspberries, So something crushed with some juices already leaking from the berries themselves, maybe slight oxidation, but not like oxidation that is uncontrolled and unwanted, but just, something that adds a bit of complexity here in the wine number 3. It almost have like a syrupy element, but not syrupy or something cooked. I have these memories from my great-grandmother, and she would, start to cook a jam from strawberries, raspberries, cherries, And then at the very beginning, when it just starts to boil, she would just scoop off the foam, and it would be just like this fruit bomb, that really intense flavor. So this on the nose reminds me of those childhood memories. And I want to say that I am looking for some of that earthiness I expect from Nebbiolo, some of that floral character. I don't find it that much here though. It is really dominated by these, fruit flavors. Let's taste it. Now, maybe it is a buildup of an alcohol, I don't know. I mean, the first sip was something so beautiful and lovely and juicy. And I had in my mind, like, isn't this lovely? This is the first sentence that I just heard when I tasted this wine. But then when I spit it out, I had that, that warm sensation from the alcohol. But it did dissipate really quickly. And while I am talking with you, it is the fruit that I feel on the aftertaste. It is the tannin, the texture that I feel. And tannin here is very, very different from the wine number 2. It shows more elegance. It might still be that sandpapery character, but with much finer, sand on it. So not as maybe broad and not as rustic, if I may say so. So the tannin here is really beautiful. It is not as elegant as wine number 1. It does show more of that Nebbiolo soul, but I think I do enjoy this wine quite a lot. I think it's really good. I will give this wine 94 points. Let's move to wine number 4. Somehow this wine seems the biggest, the largest, with the biggest soul of them all. Like, even when you smell the nose here, it does show strawberries, it does show cherries, but the cherries are, towards the black character. The strawberries are much, much riper, strawberries that you have left on those small bushes for 2 extra days to ripen. And when you pick them, they almost disintegrate in your hand. But there's also some smokiness, and literally when you close your eyes, you feel like you're entering the forest, like you feel all those, autumn leaves on the forest floor. You feel all that flora and fauna, in around you. It almost smells of moss right after rains. It is so seductive. But you feel, in the background, you feel bone, you feel power, you feel structure. Like before even tasting this wine, I know it's going to be like, I have tannin texture, I have mid palate. You just feel within it. Let's taste it finally. And you know what? I wanted to tell you, and you know what? It's not. It's really elegant, but then the aftertaste kicked in. So the very first sip, the very first impression seems lovely and light, really elegant, almost like with wine number 1. But then the wine slowly creeps up on you, and then it just starts to show its muscles. Like, I am here, didn't you hear me? Talk with me. So this is really interesting. And it keeps evolving in the glass. Like right now, I have notes of toasted nuts. Yes, so this right now is one of the most structured wines that we have had in the tasting. You just know that this wine is made for longer cellaring. Like, I can enjoy it right now. I don't mind young Barolos really. But you also know that after 10 years, it will still have enough flesh, body, and texture to survive that and age even more. And this is interesting because I really put my mind into these wines when I was purchasing them. So all of them are around same price category. They're all around 50 euros. So wines that does not necessarily cost fortune, but for sure can age 10, 20 years. Absolutely. Of course, we also have to understand that this is the vintage doing. 2021 was superb vintage, and it might not be the case, with a different vintage. But before we move to wine number 5, I will score this wine 93 points. Let's move to wine number 5 now. All right. So we have another really fragrant baby in our glass. Mostly cherries and raspberries. Actually, quite a lot of raspberries in this one. But this also shows that earthiness and intensely that note of roses and rose stems. Sometimes when they talk about Nebbiolo, they say it smells of roses and tar. I always find that it smells more earthy, and there's definitely that red berry character, which we felt in all of these wines. So maybe not as intensely with roses and tar, but that really beautiful cherry or raspberry pie. So really ripe in character. So wine number 5 seems to me like this really delicate and light wine. It has really high acidity, like elevated, and I would say that acidity defines this wine. The tannin is elevated, but not as prominent and not as rustic and not as big as with any of these wines. But it could also be due to the fact that wine number 5 is following wine number 4, which was really intensely packed. What is interesting also on the palate in wine number 5, I pick up some of that green element, like almost the same rose stem that I feel on the nose. I can almost pick it up on the palate. I cannot say that this is the most exciting part of the wine. I think on the palate, I always prefer a bit more fruit-driven wine. Texture is fine, mid-palate is fine, acidity is good. But when I pick up something green, especially Nebbiolo, it seems slightly odd to me. So for wine number 5, I will give 91 points. We have tasted and scored all 5 wines, and I think it is time to reveal them. But before we do, I just want to give a quick conclusion. And according to what we previously discussed, I would want to say that wine number 2 and 4, and maybe 3 because it was also quite structured. So wine 2 and 3 and 4 comes from either Monforte or Serralunga, because we are expected the most structured and most age-worthy wines from these communes. And then wine number 1 and wine Hello. Sorry.
Ore, ciao, io sono
Ciao. Poderi.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.
Tutto a posto?
Very good, yes. And wine number 1 and 5 would be Verduno or La Morra, because these wines showed maybe the lightest body, maybe the most immediate appeal, and maybe like a slightly silkier tannin in their texture and elevated acidity. But now we have to reveal the wines and see, because we have to understand one thing. One thing is really important. Winemaker plays a crucial part. Sometimes winemakers want to highlight the expected style from their terroir. And sometimes winemakers just simply want to make a different style, or they just want to make, a style that represents them more than maybe the terroir or their unique, plot. Because it could be the case that we are in La Morra and they have this very unique plot, terroir, that just makes bigger, bolder, more intense wines. It's completely okay. So let's start with wine number 1 that I gave 93 points. So it is indeed from Verduno. So this is something that we got correct. It is Fratelli Alessandria. It is actually really good, top producer. And I think this wine spoke beautifully with me. I loved it in the glass. It definitely offers this more immediate appeal, but I do not think that you cannot age this wine. You for sure can age this wine. It will develop more earthiness with time. So what a beautiful bottle. Thank you. Let's move to wine number 2, which I gave 92 points. All right, so we are in Barolo. So I was thinking that 2, 3, and 4, so amongst those 3, there must be Barolo. To be completely honest, I was thinking that Barolo Village was wine number 3, personally, so I have mixed those up. But Vajra, it is a really good producer. It actually has been in the Wine Spectator top 10. I think it was last year. So we do think that they make amazing wines. They also make wines that are not in your face, even though it was really intense on the nose. So let's move to wine number 3, and that will be Domenico Clerico, Monforte di Alba. So we know that they harvest only grapes from Monforte di Alba. Monforte is very similar stylistically to Serralunga. I have always been more into Serralunga style, you know. But I think Monforte also offers this really beautiful texture and age-worthiness. And I think I gave this wine 94 points. So this was the highest scored wine. And when we were preparing for this tasting, I was a bit reluctant to purchase Domenico Clerico because Domenico Clerico is known, you know, for more modern approach. But a salesperson at the shop, he convinced me. He told several times that this is the best producer in the area, and I most certainly must try it. And look at that. We gave it the highest score, so 94 points. Let's move to wine number 4, which I gave 93 points. And it is my love. It is Enrico Rivetto. It is 2021 vintage from Serralunga. So I am happy to say that structure never lies. It was really the biggest, the most structured wine. And I have to say my greatest thanks to Enrico because it is his premises. It is his premises. We are filming this video right now, so thanks to him, we can actually go inside in the warmth and film a beautiful video and tasting all these wines. So if you have not tasted his wines yet, make sure to seek them out. Most importantly, if you are ever in Barolo, make sure to visit his estate. It is unique. It is different from any other estates you will visit in Barolo, I promise to you, because his vineyards are buzzing. His vineyards are full of colors. His vineyards are not your regular, you know, same old lines of wines. They are healthy. You will see animals here. You will see biodiversity here. It is something that is really important, and it is something that his heart and passion is in. And yeah, so we have to support those who care about the land and who care about the environment and society around them. So thank you, Enrico, for this wine. And thank you, Enrico, for this room. Let's move to wine number 5, which I gave 91 points. Okay, so we are in La Morra. To be honest, I am a bit disappointed. I was really expecting this wine to be one of the highest scored wines. Of course, 91 is not, you know, low score wine. It is still beautiful and really elegant. But I do think of Oddero as one of the top producers from this area. And somehow, at some point, I did consider in my mind that it could be Oddero, of course, because of the, you know, the elevated acidity and that lightness of the body. I was expecting it to be either Verduno or La Morra, but I think stylistically they also make that kind of wine. And somewhere in my mind, I did question myself, is this like a stylistic choice? And maybe I did not score it, you know, properly, because like that green element is not necessarily something that I enjoy personally, but it could add an extra dimension, an extra like kick of complexity into the wine. So that could be a conscious decision by a winemaker. So here you go. Oddly enough, these wines actually did line up quite perfectly where they were expected to be, where they were coming from. So yes, these wines really did show what the books offer to you. So finally, because in majority of these cases, I find myself saying one thing in theory to you, and then the tasting offers completely different picture. So for once, we are happy to say out loud that books doesn't lie, that certain studies actually show that there is difference amongst these communes, and they do represent, you know, more structured and more full-bodied wines, and they do represent, you know, more elegant, more acidity-driven wines. Thank you very much for watching, and let me know in the comment section below if you already maybe have picked up some specific commune or maybe producer that you prefer better than others. And please make sure to watch this video next.